My primary exposure to Spider-Man over the years had been through the 90s TV show, the movies, and there were comic books in there too. But the comic books, by the time I was reading them, were already, 50 years in, if not a little bit more. And yeah, I guess 50 years in because I was reading the 90s. And he started in 62. The thing is that when they started Spider-Man, they didn't exactly know what they were going to do. They had the broad strokes going, but this issue, Spider-Man issue number 1, which actually features a bonus story, and it says it's 2 tales, but for some reason it has part 1, part 2, and part 3 in it. I don't know why. Is that because Amazing Fantasy was an anthology that had 3 or 4 stories in it, and they were kind of doing the same thing? I don't know, because if you look at Amazing Fantasy 15, there are stories beyond just the Spider-Man, what do you call it? Debut, introduction, origin, I guess. And that's really perplexing. So going into this issue, I was really excited for it, and after I finished it, I enjoyed it, but there were some really weird things in it that stuck out to me, and that's what I'm going to talk about. So this is MJ. I love Spider-Man, comic books in general, but Spider-Man specifically, and right now I want to talk about issue 1 of The Amazing Spider-Man. So here are the credits. The script was done by Stan Lee, the art was done by Steve Ditko, and the letterer was Johnny D. Cover's pretty cool. It shows the Fantastic Four. It shows Spider-Man trapped in this thing, which we get to see in the comic. I gotta say though, I'm not 100%. So I like the dynamism and the composition of it overall. It's pretty exciting. But I think they did a bad job, maybe a little bit, of showing exactly what was going on, because it looks like he's supposed to be trapped in this contraption, and he gets trapped in it in the comic, but on the cover he's actually, well, he almost appears to be on the outside of it. I guess you have to look kind of close, but if you're, if it's 1962 and you're holding this in your hand right up to your face, you'd see it no problem. But overall I liked it. It's funny that the Fantastic Four features in this, because the Fantastic Four was, the big team or the big book at the time, and I imagine they were including them here to goose the sales. You could say it was world building because, well, Spider-Man exists in a world with the Fantastic Four, so why wouldn't he seek them out or whatever? And I think that's a valid point, but I also think it's like, hey, we've got this Fantastic Four. They're popular. Let's use them to help sell this new magazine hero. One of the most interesting things to me is that the issue starts with a recap. So it gives a broad introduction, and then it basically recaps, it retells the story from Amazing Fantasy 15. It does it in a pretty interesting way. It actually almost reminds me of how for Spider-Man 2 they had Alex Ross do those paintings that summarized the movie, and then I think they carried it through in Spider-Man 3 as well. But that's pretty neat stuff. But I like that right away we see Peter struggling. We see him being so upset about Spider-Man. The dialogue, it's pretty clunky in some areas. I feel like the the grammar or diction or whatever is way off, and it just sounds bad, an unnatural way for those things to be said. And I know Stan Lee, I'm sure, was restricting himself from having Peter Parker swear or anything like that, and I'm not saying I wanted him to, but it just seems like maybe was he trying to illustrate the frustration? I don't know. Apparently Stan Lee's method was that he would have the artists do the art. He'd give them a broad overview of what was going to happen in the comic. They would do the art, and then I don't know if who drew the bubbles in, but then he would do the dialogue after the fact. So could be a result of that. Were there word bubbles there already that were restricting what he had the ability to say, so he just said it the best way he could, which sometimes wasn't so great? I'm not sure. What I am sure of, though, is that I enjoyed the fact that there are multiple levels to the unintended consequences of Peter's selfishness. He wanted to let the world hang, and so, he refused to stop that thief who ended up murdering, killing Uncle Ben. Uncle Ben was still working, still earning money for the family, and when he died, the money stopped. And so they had, grief to deal with, and then poverty on top of that, because they didn't have any money. So Peter actually contemplates, and I don't know how to, well, anyway, that's a stupid distraction I was going to bring up, but it's interesting, Peter had been doing the appearances as Spider-Man in order to make money, and I think, gosh, did he get cash? Maybe he got cash in Amazing Fantasy 15, but for sure, here he ends up not getting cash, but that's kind of something to deal with later. But he considers briefly a life of crime, and Spider-Man definitely did not start out as a hero, and I like that. It adds a little complexity to Peter, and I think it's good because, we'll have to see how it develops over the rest of these comics, because I'm planning on reading like the first 12 or so issues, kind of incorporate Amazing Fantasy 15 was August of 62, so maybe I'll read 12 or so issues until I get to August of 63 and get those first ones under my belt and kind of see who is Peter Parker and how do they change his character and what's Spider-Man all about in the beginning, because that's what it would have been. It would have been they would have been developing him as they were making him, so to speak. So I want to see what they thought this guy was going to be like. Ultimately, he's heroic, but how much does he struggle to overcome, the urge to do evil, the urge to be selfish, again, to do wrong, and, become a hero. I don't know. It's pretty interesting. What's more neat is that besides deciding that he could end up getting caught, it would be wrong to do, first of all, and then if he were caught, it would, kill Aunt May, basically, give her a heart attack. It would give her such grief that he decides not to do it. But beyond that, he decides to use his power, I guess keep his suit with him all the time anyway. He can't perform as Spider-Man anymore because J Jonah Jameson of the Daily Bugle, the editor over there, has written an editorial against him saying that he's a menace, and that if kids want to imitate him, that'd be terrible, and that if we want someone to influence our youth, it should be people like John Jameson, the astronaut or test pilot, which is JJ's son, and or Triple J's son, I should say. Anyway, it's funny. Peter can't make the money as Spider-Man. He can't, because he has no ID or anything like that. He can't deposit his check as Spider-Man and have it cashed. And for whatever reason, his manager could only give him a check, not cash. So he's frustrated, and it's really funny. Stanley says something like, "Oh, with nothing better to do, he just goes and joins these people watching this test flight." And I thought about how funny that is. And I'm not sure that the story could be written exactly the same way today, because, if you want to, there's always something else you could be doing. He could have been playing, video games or something. Although I suppose if they're poor, maybe he wouldn't have wanted to waste, internet or electricity or whatever. But it's just kind of funny. When you were poor back in the day, you had no job, you couldn't do anything, you'd just wander around outside and join people witnessing things. So that was fun. But anyway, John Jameson is in this test space shuttle thing, and it ends up going haywire, and it's really cool. Peter sees that, Jameson could lose his life, so despite the fact that he was so wronged by the Daily Bugle, he goes ahead and gets his Spider-Man suit on, which apparently he was still wearing under his clothes just in case something were to happen, and he rescues him. And I think the thing that's most impressive to me is, well, the story's a little bit, or the dialogue's kludgy, and the story's a little, it could be tighter. The great thing that they nailed right away, and again, some details are weird as to how Peter does what he does. The action is still really great. I'm going to say it's high-flying. I'm not trying to make a pun. But, like, the action is really dynamic. It's the first issue in, besides Amazing Fantasy 15. And in Amazing Fantasy 15, his web swinging was a little bit weird. It didn't look that great. But it looks really good here. Or it looks better here. And they do more things with it. And it feels like they're just kind of feeling out exactly what he can do with his spider webs and how he can swing through the city and get places. There's a line about how he's having a hard time fighting against the wind resistance with even with his super strength, the spider strength. But that doesn't seem to be something that persists later on. Maybe he gets stronger, just more confident or whatever, or maybe it's just something they wanted to drop over time, or maybe it was a plot point that was kind of useless to utilize anymore. And it definitely adds tension and drama if he's struggling with it in the beginning. But the way Ditko draws him is really great. A lot of the angles used in the panels are really, I guess you could say, cinematic. I don't know if that's quite the right word, but they do just such an excellent job of conveying the action, the motion, the danger. They're still panels, but they get the job done, and they do it very effectively. So that's all really great stuff. This is kind of a compliment on the art and the writing. There's after he saves Jameson, the Daily Bugle has a op-ed by Jonah that's saying Spider-Man is a menace and we should run him out of town, basically. The way Peter is drawn at the table, he's sitting down at the breakfast table reading the newspaper. He just looks so distraught. The way he's hunched over, the way his face looks, he looks like he just got beat down, and that he's shocked, flummoxed, flabbergasted, whatever you want to say. He looks like it's been taken out of him, and he cannot believe what's happening, despite the fact that he saved Jameson. And I kind of wonder, this is where the story stuff comes in, I kind of wonder if he was saving Jameson in part to kind of save Spider-Man's reputation, because he thought, surely everything will be fine. I can be Spider-Man and be successful. People won't be afraid. People won't be outraged. I saved this guy's son, this guy who was maligning me. Maybe he'll do me a favor now, and everything will be fine. And I like that his motivations are muddied. And of course, it's subtext that his motivations may have been wrong. He might not have just been saving Jameson to save him because he had the power. Therefore, he had the responsibility to, to use it well, or to use it, to help people. And that's kind of fun. And I think as much as I criticized Stan Lee for the dialogue being a little poorly put together, because hokey, it was the 60s and it was a comic book, and these are books meant for kids, but I feel like he did a really good job in including that subtext, adding ambiguity, adding in a bit of an edge to Peter and to Spider-Man. And I don't know if that would make the reader more invested, but it sure made him feel more human to me, and I liked that. And I don't know, it's kind of comforting knowing that he could be such a jerk, but at the same time do such great, noble, good things. I don't know, maybe it makes me feel better about me being such a jerk sometimes. Alright, it's time for me to move on to the second story in here about the Chameleon coming along. This really felt like the same. Anyway, first the credits. So script Stan Lee, art Steve Ditko, lettering John Duffi, different guy. Is John Duffi and Joe Duffi, are they related? I wonder. Anyway, I'll find that out later, I'm sure. But yeah, this issue or mini issue, is this what you call a backup issue? I don't know. I hear your boy Zach talking about backup issues sometimes, and I don't really know what that is. It sounds like it's kind of at the back of a comic, a short little story, but I don't really know. I'm not down with all the lingo. I'm still a little bit of a noob to all this, or I'm really thinking about comics as I'm reading them now, as opposed to just taking them in and that's it. So I guess I never thought about it as an industry before, just as an art or as a medium for me to get my stories. So I, who cares if there's technical terms? It doesn't matter. It is what it is. Anyway, so the inclusion of the Fantastic Four, and this is pretty cool. There were some funny things, like I didn't expect, like Ben Grimm was drawn kind of small in some panels. He looked like he was just an orange man, a good orange man. And I thought that was a bold choice of Marvel to make. No, he just looked kind of orange and roundish, a much thicker body style than anybody else. But anyway, I think that was probably my biggest complaint about the art. But I think Kirby is actually the main artist for Fantastic Four, so I can kind of understand Ditko getting them wrong. And this is, I think, if I've got my Marvel history correct, Fantastic Four had only been out for a little while before Spider-Man came out. So it's not too big of a deal, and I'm not going to gripe about it. And honestly, I'm zoomed in looking at it on my phone, each individual panel, not looking at the page as a whole. So I think that definitely changes your perception of the quality of the art. So I'm not going to gripe about that. Although Sue Storm's hair is funny. I'm used to seeing, I probably saw, besides Jessica Alba, my biggest exposure to Sue Storm was probably her, how she was drawn in the Fantastic Four cartoon from, I don't know. I think it was produced at the same time as the Iron Man cartoon, both of which I watched a ton or as much as I could as a kid. And those predated the Spider-Man cartoon, which was like in '94 by a couple of years. So anyway, but back to the comic. I like the idea that Peter has to join the Fantastic Four because, like, hey, they must, get their bills paid. And it turns out they're just altruistic, basically, and they only cover their expenses, and the rest goes into research for, like bettering mankind or whatever. So that was pretty funny. But it kind of did make me interested to read the Fantastic Four books. I've only read the first one. I've only read the first one. That was months ago. But it makes me wonder about their exploits as adventurers and whatnot. And do they find treasure and things like that, or what do they do? How are they making money? Because I get that Reed would be interested in being altruistic and being responsible, especially since weren't they on like a government ship when they got hit by those solar rays? Is that their origin? Or cosmic rays? That's what it was. Anyway, I don't quite remember, but it does pique my interest in Fantastic Four, and based on the cover of the book, as it is, I could totally see somebody who is reading Fantastic Four saying, "Hey, Fantastic Four are going to be in this, Spider Guy issue. I'll definitely check this out." And I think it was worthwhile. I enjoyed the introduction of the Chameleon, although it's funny that at first, his power mostly comes down to planning and to having a multi-pocketed vest that has different masks in it that he can put on. The funniest thing about that is that the vest has pockets that he holds wigs in and face masks in that are realistically, human looking, or lifelike, I should say. But then, what does he do about the rest of the clothes? Does he just steal things? Does he make them? How much time does the guy need? Does he just have coveralls so you can get in and out of most places? I don't know. But I did enjoy the shtick of him, stealing people's identities, and the concept that if you could look like someone, you could infiltrate almost anywhere. That's a really great idea. He's Russian, he's a communist, so I don't know if he's supposed to be a Soviet spy specifically, because he is stealing military information, I think. And, I guess that would make sense. I don't know the whole history of the Cold War, so I couldn't really tell. But I would assume that they're pulling from pop culture and the the zeitgeist, or I don't know if zeitgeist is the right word to say, like the cultural milieu of the world they were living in at the time. And like, hey, we're afraid of Russians infiltrating and spies doing bad things, so let's make one of our villains that Spider-Man fights a chameleon. No, a Russian, a Soviet, a commie. And it's funny, they even call him a commie in the issue. Yeah, I'm not sure what else to say about that. I like how his creepy face has got like slits where his eyes and mouth would be, and then he's got like those weird goggles. Again, from the cartoon, the Chameleon has a belt that allows him to change form, and that seems way more practical, that it would be some sort of super technology or whatever, but I like the idea of like the spy craft of him having this little lair where he, makes all his masks and he does research and, sews Spider-Man suits so he can impersonate him. And then the guy invented a friggin' web shooting gun. That's pretty cool. And I liked his plan overall. That'd be cool to see the web shooting gun come back at some point, but I doubt it will, but who knows. I think, doesn't Mysterio end up duplicating Spider-Man's webbing too at some point? So it's interesting that they had it so that his webbing wasn't something like super unique and that other people could replicate it to some extent. It's kind of a fun idea. I don't know what that does for the story overall, but it's neat. But I like that Chameleon's spider web comes out of a gun. That's kind of fun. One weird thing I want to highlight, though, real quick as I close out, because basically it was a really good issue. Interesting. I think the formatting, like the way they're kind of still figuring things out with the part 1, part 2, part 3, like that doesn't make sense. I'm kind of perplexed by that. But even worse than that was in a couple panels, I think 2 or 3, they call Peter Parker in the narration Peter Palmer. And I'm thinking, was that Stan Lee who wrote that wrong? We've got this John Duffi as opposed to Johnny D doing the lettering. So, like, was Lee's writing real sloppy? I'm sure he wasn't standing over the letterer telling him the narration or telling him the dialogue. He probably wrote it down. So was that written with pen? Was it, and it got smudged, or was it pencil and got smudged, or did he like tell him over the phone? Or, like, how did it happen that in your first issue, your first official issue launching this character, that in the second part, this extra story, you're calling him Peter Palmer, and in like 2 or 3 places, and it was really funny, and it made me like I wanted to crack a bunch of jokes about it, but like I'm not that funny, so I'm not gonna try on the fly here. But like, man, Peter freaking Palmer, like I cannot believe that made it through. Like, who was the editor at the time? I don't think they say on the credits. It's just script art and lettering. So, but like, man, what the heck? That's crazy. But I don't know, man. I don't know what it was like at that time in '62. I don't know what kind of world we were living in. Maybe everybody was high over there at Marvel and didn't, do a good enough QC, or maybe they didn't care because it was disposable media and they didn't expect that some guy decades later would, be emotionally damaged enough that he would latch on to Spider-Man as a surrogate father figure and would, probably going a little too far. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I feel a little dumb saying this, but I definitely recommend you go back and check these out, especially if you have the Marvel Unlimited app. There are so many old comics you can check out and just see what it was like at the time, and that's kind of what I want to do. See what it was like at the time, why Spider-Man's a hero, why he connects, and how it was that he was successful. Thank you for sticking with me. Check out mjmunoz.com for more of my work. I talk about tokusatsu and write original fiction you can find there. I'm also participating in Tokutember, making tokusatsu-inspired art for the month of September. I'm an aspiring author who will gladly accept your financial support through coffee. Swinging Through Comics can be found on YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, and mjmunoz.com/stc. Relevant links are in the show notes. Also, I wrote a short story called The Hammer Falls, which is featured there. It's in, I read it to you, so there's like an audio format of it, and then you can just read it yourself if you want, and you can find that on my blog. If you had a good time, like and share this, subscribe and ring that bell to catch me the next time I'm swinging through comics.